Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to our 33rd Saturday online Kashmir Cultural Heritage Awareness Series. Our speaker today is Shri Chaman Gadoo on ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Hindus. We are from Chennai, studying in class 12 and 9. Their source of inspiration towards music started from their father, Shri N. Chandrasekhar, who is a harmonium vidwan. They started training from their father right from the age of 4. Currently, they are training under Srimati J.B. Kirtana for both classical vocal and Nama Sankirtanam. Both the sisters have won many prizes from eminent sabhas, district, and school level competitions. Nidhi is also a recipient of the Center for Cultural Resources and Training Scholarship from the Government of India for Fine Arts. Over to you, Nidhi and Gauri.
Namaskaram. मोहध्वस्त्यै वैनिकवैयासिकी मुख्या संविन्मुद्रा पुस्तकवीणाक्ष गुणान्यम् हस्ताम्बोजैः बिभ्रतमाराधितवन्ता सम्प्रत्यञ्चं दक्षिणवक्त्रं कलयामि सम्प्रत्यञ्चं दक्षिणवक्त्रं कलयामि भद्रारूढं भद्रदमाराधयितृणा भक्तिश्रद्धा पूर्वगमीशं प्रणमन्ति आदित्यायं वाञ्छितसिद्धयै करुणाब्धिं तं प्रत्यञ्चं दक्षिणवक्त्रं कलयामि
Thank you, Nidhi and Gauri. We'll see you again in our program.
Thank you.
We thank Sri Kanchi Mutt for our ongoing series and offer our namaskaram to His Holiness Sri Shankara Vijayendra Saraswati Swamigal. Sri Kanchi Mutt has always been in the forefront, modestly working with the sole aim of national integration, spiritual enlightenment, and preserving the uniqueness as Kashmir is our cultural heritage. I am very pleased to introduce Sri Chaman Gadoo, an octogenarian born in Srinagar, Kashmir, and an engineer by profession, has been an ardent social activist and a prolific writer. I had to carefully read his resume to figure out that he is an electronics engineer too, as his major contribution is Kashmiri Hindu cause. Sri Gadoo worked diligently for the Kashmiri Hindus cause as the president of Kashmiri Samiti, Delhi, a nodal agency for displaced Kashmiri Hindus, and president Bharatiya Janata Party, J&K Cell, Delhi Pradesh for more than 2 decades. He moved a first-time resolution at a BJP meet presided by Shri K.N. Sahani, Shri L.K. Advani, Srimati Sushma Swaraj, National General Secretary BJP, who seconded the resolution, and other BJP leaders for abrogation of Article 370 on 28th November 1995. Yes, 25 years ago. Earlier, as president of Kashmiri Samiti, during a press conference, which was widely covered by print media on June 10, 1993. He urged government to scrap Article 370 for peace and prosperity of the troubled valley. Sri Gadoo has served the community in exile, organized many protest rallies, demonstrations, seminars, and press conferences to highlight genocide, ethnic cleansing, and plight of Kashmir Hindus during the last 30 years. He headed a delegation to meet US Congressman Stephen Solars, Chairman, House of Subcommittee on Asian and Pacific Affairs on 31st May 1990 at Delhi. He attended Kashmir Pandit's London Summit hosted by Indo-European Kashmiri Forum, June 1997. During November 1998, he participated in a seminar on Kashmir at the House of Commons in London. He also attended meeting with lawmakers of Indian Caucus, USA, Washington, D.C. on Kashmir during 1998. Gadoo has authored several books, and Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee personally distributed the booklet on human rights violations in Kashmir. At an event in the United Nations Human Rights Council session in Geneva, and several other books distributed by eminent personalities like Sri Ravi Shankar. Interesting titles, most along with Dr. K.K. Teng are White Paper on Kashmir, Human Rights Violation in Jammu and Kashmir, Human Rights Violation in Kashmir, The Bitter Truth, Kashmir, Greater Autonomy, Sri Ram Temple Movement, Temples of Kashmir, Tirthas, Jammu and Kashmir, Uddhava Gita, Kashmir Hindu Shrines, Kashmir Hindu religious culture, and many more. We are very pleased to have Shri Chaman Gadoo among us and to speak on the topic that he has been involved for a very, very long time. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar, my pranam to all Swamijis of the Great Mutt and seek their blessings on Hindu New Year. Today is Nowre, as we call it in Kashmir. I, I am today speaking on a different subject which has not been taken over by you so far. You have been conducting all lectures by eminent speakers on the culture and religion of Kashmiri Hindus. But today I'm taking up a very sensitive issue, how Kashmiri Pandits were rather dragged out from their homeland, and then the pain, the agony they suffered all these years. I'm going to speak on that subject. But before going to that, I want to give some backgrounder because many of the learned speakers have spoken much about the culture or of Kashmiri Pandits, but still it needs some introduction which has been left, and I want to just connect all these points here. Actually, and frankly speaking, the history of Kashmir begins with the history of Vedic civilization of India. The people of Kashmir are a part of the Proto-Vedic people of India who have inhabited Kashmir from the most ancient times, going back to the later Stone Age culture of Indian people who lived in the whole of north of India. The Hindus of Kashmir are descendants of the ancient people whose remains were found at Burzahom in Kashmir as well as in Harappa, and the people who inhabited Mohenjo-daro in the Sindh Valley. The human skeletons found at Burzahom in Kashmir point to a common ancestry of the people of northern India who in the ancient times lived along the banks of the river Saraswati. Archaeological excavations at Burzahom, Kashipur, and graphical in Kashmir has thrown up evidence of close contact between Kashmir and Harpan culture. The excavations carried on by the Archaeological Survey of India in Jammu have found evidence of Harpan settlements on the banks of the river Chenab at the Manda near Akhlur, bringing the Vedic civilization close to the geographical boundaries of Kashmir. There is hardly any doubt left of the Vedic nature of the Harpan civilization now. Actually, those people who lived in Harpa and Majuda, unfortunately, both these places are in Pakistan, were Aryans, and their culture was basically Vedic. There is enough ground to believe that people of Kashmir formed a part of Saraswati civilization because it is hardly possible that the people who lived in Kashmir could not have established contact with the Saraswati culture which spread over whole of the northern India. Hindus of Kashmir are known as Saraswat Brahmins and trace their ancestry to the Saraswat Brahmins living along the course of legendary river Saraswati, which formed the cradle of Vedic civilization in India. Evidence is also available of the close contact between the people of Saraswati civilization and people of Kashmir. Nilbata era of the Hindu history of Kashmir followed the disappearance of the river Saraswati. It is said that 1900 in 1900 BC, we lost the great legendary river Saraswati. The word Saraswat is derived from the Rigvedic Saraswati river. The Saraswat Brahmins are Hindu Brahmins who have spread from Kashmir in North India to Konkan in West India to Kadara in coastal region of Karnataka and Kerala in South India. And now the important part is the offsprings of rishis and sages. The small community of Saraswat Brahmins of Kashmir have been like their ancestors, and still they are by and large sober and peace loving. Nilbat Purana narrates, I quote, 65 rituals and festivals were celebrated with great devotion, faith, pomp, and show. Some of the rituals and festivals find mention in other Puranas also. Some of these are celebrated even today in Kashmir, like Kav Punim and Khesimavas. Unquote. It is generally thought that the Nilmat Purana talks of rituals and festivals as Nagas only, and these being adopted by Aryan Brahmins of Kashmir, which is not so. Many of the rituals, festivals, and days are common with those followed by Aryans in Bharatvarsha or emanating from Vedas. In fact, the Nilvat Purana is a Vaishnavite text. The Mahatmayas, of which large number were written in Kashmir, provide a wide range of facts and data about the evolution of Sanskrit religious culture in Kashmir, its basic Vedic foundation and philosophic, mythological, and ritual content, which assumed from the Upanishad, the Brahmanas, the Puranas, and the Dharma Shastra. The Mahatmayas are testimony of basic unity that pervades the religious culture of Hindus of Kashmir and Sanskrit culture of Hindu India. I want to add, you will find Mahatmas all over India, especially of all tirthas. And they are only described the tirtha. But in Kashmir, our Mahatma is not only they describe that the religious tirthas, but also about the geography and the culture and people of that land. We had about 52 Mahatmas, but unfortunately, I most of them are not available. I could lay on hand on 5 Mahatmas, which I could compile for my book, earlier book. Kashmir Hindu shrines. Incidentally, the traditional calendar of the Kashmiri Pandits, Saptarishi Samvat, is 5098, corresponding to 2022 AD. The Saptarishi era of the Kashmiri Hindu calendar has started on Navre, New Year Day of Kashmiri Pandit, that is today itself. And some 5098 years ago, according to the legend, the celebrated Saptarishis assembled on the Sharika Parvat, Hari Parvat, the abode of goddess Sharika, at the auspicious moment when the first ray of the sun fell on the Chakrishwara on this day and paid tribute to Devi. Astrologers made this moment as the basis of their calculations of the Nava Varsha Pratipada, marking the beginning of the Saptarishi era. Before their exodus, Kashmiri Pandits would flock to Hari Parvat in thousands to celebrate Navre. I want to tell you more about this great temple. We have learned that at Sharika, the temple which is known as Sakrishwara, I mean, there was an original Sri Chakra which was found on a big stone there, which our people used to worship from time immemorial. Even when Adi Shankaracharya visited that place, it is said that he got lot of inspiration from that original Sri Yantra, and then he has carried the whole thing, and now then he has established those Sri Yantras at different places. I go to Sri Adi Shankara. Kashmiri Hindus have a rich cultural heritage. Nilvat Purana, the Mahatmaya social and cultural data about the history of Kashmir made available in the Raj Taragni of Kalhana and John Raja. The Agmas and the spiritual literature of the Hindus of Kashmir represent a philosophy which is essentially Sanskrit in content. The Hindus of Kashmir follow the adoption of the Greh Sutras made by Logakshi Rishi, who had laid down the sanskaras, the procedures of worship, and precepts of and practice of the performance of ritual of the Hindus of Kashmir. There is lot other Sanskrit literature on religion, history, philosophy, law lore, including Nati Shastra, Kam Sutra. As much as 30% of the whole Sanskrit literature came from Kashmir. Apart from this, we still hold lineage, that is the Gotras, which were established by Saptarishis. But now it has multiplied by, with the passage of the time, it has multiplied many, many times. But we still hold that Gotra system. Kashmir possessed numerous religious endowments and shrines. Many Hindu monarchs built numerous elegant temples. Some of these still exist. Lalitaditya Muktapaya was the greatest Hindu emperor Kashmir has ever produced. He built a number of new towns with the temples of great archaeological importance. Great Kalhana, he writes in Rajatarangri, I quote, there was not a township, no village, no river, no island where the king did not lay down a sacred foundation. Unquote. 3 centuries later, Emperor Kanshika convened the fourth Buddhist council in Kashmir, which led to the foundation of Mahayana sect. Buddhist missionaries from Kashmir carried it to Central Asia and China. Vaishnavism, Buddhism, and Shaivism flourished side by side in Kashmir. The worship of Mother in the form of Bhavani, which underlines the Shakta, the basic groundwork of the Hindu worship, is definitely the most ancient form of worship in Kashmir. I want to just elaborate it. It is only Sanatana Dharma, yeah, in Hinduism, mother goddess is worshipped. And it is a very old, ancient practice. Even when our archaeological departments had investigation, erstwhile in undivided India at Harpa and Banjodara, they found in each and every house a small murti of goddess. And we were told they collected more than 200 such murtis. But we know today only about the dancing girl of Manjudara. Nobody speaks about those murtis. I want to tell you for this very reason that uh, mother worship was uh, in India from time immemorial, just from the Vedic times. That time, during Vedic times, apart from Paramatma, the chief god was Indra. Even Indra used to worship Indrani. The Indrakshi Sutram is still prevalent in Kashmir. This is a sutram consisting of 64 names of great Devi. And each name has lot of explanations. It is not, it is merely a name, but it is something very, very important to know for every Hindu. What the name of our mother denotes. It is not only that, we in Kashmir, just as in the rest of India, people have Kul Devas or or Ishtadevas. We in Kashmir used to have Ishtadevis. We, we worship Ishtadevis. Again, I will tell you one more thing. When at a stage when Buddhism flourished in Kashmir, those people who started worshipping Buddha, they were not satisfied with worshipping Buddha only. They brought mother of Buddha, Tara, and they started worshipping mother because in their genes they had that mother worship. So they started worshipping that also. This is a long story, but I want to come to my actual what I have to speak today. That is the ethnic cleansing, the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits, which is a really tragic story, and it is mostly during the Muslim rule that we had to suffer a lot. And when I explain the whole thing, you will yourself come to know the atrocities, the pain we have suffered. Kashmir basically was a Hindu kingdom which had touched the pinnacles of glory under the Karkotas and later the Utpalas, extending its territories north and east as well as west, and which had become a major military power in the north of India, passed under the Muslim rule early in the 14th century. When a Tibetan fugitive, Rinchen, seized the throne of the kingdom, Rinchen was supported in his struggle for power by Shah Mir, a Muslim adventurer and a soldier of fortune who had taken service in the kingdom of Kashmir and had risen to power and position with the patronage of Hindu kings. Rinchen, a Buddhist, after he had seized the throne, embraced Islam, evidently under the influence of Shah Mir, whose support he needed to consolidate his hold on the Hindu kingdom. Rinchen took the decision to embrace Islam for his own political interest to keep Shah Mir, who had assumed formidable power in the Hindu kingdom, on his side. Rinchen's death after a short spell of the rule over Kashmir plunged Kashmir into turmoil, taking advantage of the continued unrest in the kingdom which the feudal landlords spread. Shah Mir seized the throne and laid down the foundations of Miri dynasty. In 1939, Shah Mir became the first Muslim ruler of Kashmir. For the next 5 centuries, Muslim monarchs ruled Kashmir. Here I want to clarify one more thing. A lot of trap has been introduced. They say that Rinchen wanted to go in for Hinduism, but those Brahmins at that time they refused. But this is not true. You know, Buddhism. Rinchen was a Buddhist. Kashmir was a great center of Buddhism at that time. We never had a distinction between a Buddhist and a Hindu. It is the Rinchen who himself wanted power. He was power hungry. For that reason, he converted to Islam. He never asked for going for Hinduism. The ruthlessness with which the Muslim rulers of Kashmir dealt with the Hindus and their religious culture is portrayed vividly by the account left behind by the Muslim chroniclers at the time of the times in the Persian language. I want to quote some of the Muslim chroniclers because they were free to describe what was happening, and that will give you more insight, the truth about the carnage, what happened in Kashmir. Writing without any reserve upon them, their narratives were frank and forthright, vividly describing the extermination of the infidels and the destruction of their temples. Hundreds of thousands of Hindus were killed, thousands of them left Kashmir and went to exile, and the rest were converted in Islam. Baristan-i-Shahi, a Persian work, is a chronicle of medieval Kashmir written in 1614 AD and recently translated in English by Padam Shri Dr. Kashinath Pandita, a noted Persian scholar and an expert in Central Asian studies, reveals the truth. Baharistani-Shahi narrates, at this time, I quote, at this time, only a handful of people in Kashmir have embraced Islam, and further narrates one of the events how the chief Wazir Malik Qazi Chak of the ruling king ordered the mass massacre of Hindus at the instance of Saids. Saids are Muslim religious people. The massacre was scheduled for the day of approaching Ashura. This is the year 1518. During the Ashura, about 7 to 800 infidels were put to death. Ashura falls during the Muharram because he was the Shia king. So he wanted to please perhaps his mentors, and he wanted to convert whole of the Hindu society of Kashmir to Muslim. Those killed were the leading personalities of the community of infidels at that time, men of substance and government functionaries. Thus, the entire community of infidels in Kashmir was converted to Islam at the point of the sword. Unquote. In a footnote appended to his translation of Baharistani Shahi, Pandit Kashinath Pandita writes, it is recorded in Tuhfatul Ahbab, another Persian work, is the biography of Shamsuddin Muhammad Iraqi, a Shia Muslim missionary who visited Kashmir during 16th century, that on the insist of Shamsuddin Iraqi, Musa Raina issued orders that every day 1,500 to 2,000 infidels be brought to the doorsteps of Mir Shamsuddin by his followers. They would remove their sacred third, administer kalima to them, and made them eat beef. Unquote. What was done to those who refused conversion is not mentioned. Tawfat al-Ahbab is full of detailed description of demolition of Hindu temples in Kashmir. Hardly any temple was spared from destruction. The destruction of Hindu shrine Shiva Vijeshwara, situated in the present-day Bijpur in South Kashmir, is recounted here. To show the continuity in the process of the demolition of the Hindu temples over centuries, Tawfat al-Ahbab relates the grandeur of the temple, which he describes, I quote, had no parallel in the beauty and artistic splendor, with its top capped with the rising pinnacles. Skandar, unquote. Skandar the Buchkin got the pinnacles removed and carried to the city, where they were placed, I quote again, on the four well-known structures of the city. Tawfik al-Ahbab notes, I quote, one was put atop the Jama Masjid, second atop the tomb of Amir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, the third on the top of the couple of Skandar's tomb, and the fourth atop the palace of Skandar in Harin Bazaar. Unquote. Tawfiq al-Ahbab further notes, Shamsuddin Iraqi came to that place in person and saw the demolition of the temple. The foundations of the temple of the infidels were demolished and the stones were brought to the his stay rather, where these were used to build a boundary wall of Hamdani Lodge. A splendid mosque was raised in place of temple. I unquote. The author of Tawfiq al-Ahbab writes, Shamsuddin Iraqi began his enterprise of destroying temples with the temple of Kohimaran, Hari Parbat, which I had mentioned earlier. Hari Parbat is the most sacred place of the Hindus in Kashmir, atop of which was a mighty temple where Hindus worship. The temple was demolished. Tafatul Ahbab records, I quote, a temple of the infidels existed at the place. Its foundation was dismantled and the idol house was set on fire till it was fully consumed in flames. About the demolition of the Hindu temples, the author of Tafsir Ahbab, a local Muslim who calls himself Muhammad Ali Kashmiri, notes, I quote, Hazrat Amir Samaduddin took great pains in breaking idols and smashing statues. He succeeded in his Islam mission of Islamic faith, and the laws of religion were strengthened in Kashmir. The number of idol houses, temples of the infidels in this land was so large that one could give a full account of them. My pen is helpless in counting each of these. I therefore pull up the rein of my pen at this point and leave the count and account of the demolition of the temples by Iraqi at this point, although one is unable to make the count. I unquote. Amir Shah, Amir Shamsuddin Iraqi carried his campaign of conversion to every village and every Hindu home. Please now listen very carefully. The author of Tafel Ahbab narrates when Iraqi accomplished mission of converting people or training and guiding them in the new faith, he addressed the task of converting and guiding women folk. Pious and honest and trustworthy dervish and Sufis were selected and the task assigned it to them. They were sent to all villages, localities, and towns. In fact, they reached every house. When they came to the house homestead, they would get hold of the cow belonging to the housekeeper, kill it, and sit down to eat beef in the company of the woman folk and rest of the family members. Along with this, they administered the recitation of kalima to the woman folk of the household and taught them the basic of Islam. Distinguished and sincere dervishes would enter the house of aristocrats and the elite in order to administer kalima to them and make them eat beef. I unquote. Since the arrival of Islam in Kashmir, practically there was unabated migration of Kashmiri Hindus from Valley, their birthplace. However, the following 7 mass exodus of minority community from Kashmir have been recorded by eminent community scholars and historians. I will tell you about the mass conversions as well as mass killings and other problems which were faced by Kashmiri Pandits who were forced to leave Kashmir. The first exodus, as has been recorded, I feel there was hardly any day when there was not a exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir ever since Muslims ruled Kashmir. But still, these 7 mass exoduses have been taken up by our historians. I will put it before them. First exodus was Sultan Sikandar, whom we call the Butshikan, 1389, 1413. That is after almost 50 years of Muslim rule. Shah Mir became the founder of Muslim rule in Kashmir. Islam became the court religion. Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, 1314-3085, wrote in Zakharat-ul Mulk, another book. I quote, Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani Shah Hamdan entered Kashmir with 700 Sayyids and his son Mir Muhammad Hamdani with 300 more. That means all about 1,000 people. They endured in the valley under the royal protection and disseminated the message of Islam. Unquote. With his repressive measures backed by state administration, he achieved the conversion of 37,000 Kashmiri Hindus to Islam during the latter 2 of his 3 visits. The persecution was so severe that Hindus either left the valley or converted to Islam until only 11 Hindu families were left behind. This marks the first exodus of the Kashmiri Hindus from their native land. They fled to neighboring regions of Kashtwar and Bhadrawa via Simthan Pass and to various provinces of India via Batot, which we used to call Batwat, because Kashmir Pandits were known as Batas also. What means their way. Now that is known as Batot. Sultan Sikandar the Butshikan ascended the throne in 1389. He was a religious fanatic and offered privileged position to new converts. He appointed Safuddin, originally a Brahmin called Sahabat, as chief minister. He banned all ceremonies and celebration and imposed jizya upon Hindus. It's a sort of tax. And stopped them from using tilak on their forehead. Sikandar Butshikan imposed jizya equal to 4 tolas of silver on Hindus. The system was stolas, their Rati stolas, those days. Hassan, another Kashmiri Muslim historian, writes in History of Kashmir, I quote, "This country possessed from the times of Hindu kings many temples which were like the wonders of the world. Their artistry was so fine and delicate that one found himself bewildered at their sight. Skandar destroyed them all and left them with the earth, and with their materials built many mosques and khanqahs. Khanqahs mean Muslim shrines. I unquote. Hassan further adds, I quote, Skandar meted out greatest oppression to the Hindus. It was notified uh, in the valley that if a Hindu does not become a Muslim, he must leave the country or be killed. As a result, some of the Hindus fled away, some accepted Islam, and many Brahmins consented to be killed and gave their lives. It is said that Skandar collected by these methods 6 mounds of sacred thread from Hindu converts and burned them. Paradise Lost, a book written by Professor K.L. Bond, notes, in the wake of this diamond decree of Skandar, 7 mounds of sacred thread of the murdered Brahmins were burned by Skandar, and all their sacred books were thrown into the Dal Lake. The Kashmiri Pandits, numbering over 1 lakh, were drowned in the lake, were burned at a spot in the vicinity of Ranavari in Srinagar state known as Bhattamazar. Bhattamazar means the graveyard of Kashmiri Pandits, beyond present day Joji Lankar. According to the living memory of the Kashmiri Pandits, only 11 Kashmiri Pandit families stayed back in Kashmir. The rest, rather than abandoning the religion of their fathers, chose to migrate, leaving behind their beloved home, hearths, lands, and everything, only to protect their religion and faith. Dharma has been always our first priority. Although in our Manusmriti, which has been misquoted, the 2 words from that Dharma, Rakshati Dharma. That means Dharma, he is protector of Dharma. Although here I want to tell you something more apart from it. Manu never meant the caste system that a Brahman's son is a Brahman or Kshatriya's son is a Kshatriya, Shudra's son is nothing like that. It was not by birth, but it was by karma. The Muslim monarchs and English people, they tried to divide Hindu society to hilt by using and applying the same what we call caste system of Hindus. Manu had a very scientific view, but unfortunately, everybody for their own benefits, they try to misinterpret it. Now I come again back to Jona Raja, another historian, a 12th century historian, compares this Holocaust of Hindus to, I quote, locusts descending on the and destroying a paddy field. He further says that crowds of Hindus, this is very important, that the crowds of Hindus fled their homes in different directions to escape carnage. Hungry and thirsty in the scorching heat of the plains, many died with their tongues lolled out like dogs. Thus occurred the first exodus of the Hindus of Kashmir. See the tragedy. W. Lawrence notes in his book the valley of Kashmir. I quote, the Swarsat Brahmins of Kashmir were given three choices: death, conversion, or exile. Many fled, many were converted, and many were killed. And it is said that this monarch Skandar burned 7 mounds of sacred thread of the bordered Brahmins. Now listen carefully. As for the statements of Hassan and Lawrence, 6 mounds of sacred threads were of converts and 7 mounds of murder pens were burned. That means the number of people of these 13 mounds of sacred threads, genuines, might have been tremendously colossal. Can you imagine? Now I come to second Exodus. Ali Shah, the persecutor, 1413 to 1420, son of Sikandar the Butshikin, followed his father's footsteps. During his short rule of 6 years, he retained Sohabat as chief minister to continue his earlier crimes and atrocities against Hindus. The exodus of Kashmiri politics remained unabated for the second time as well. According to Jodha Raja, the plight of Hindus in Kashmir in the reign of Ali Shah was no better. Sahabat passed the limit of levying jizya on the twice born, that is, Hindus. This evil minded man forbade ceremonies and processions on the new moon. He became envious of the Brahmin Hindus who had become fearless, would keep up their caste by going over the foreign countries. He therefore ordered posting of Scots on the roads, not to allow passage to anyone without a passport. Then, as the Scots, as the fisherman torments fish, so this low-born man tormented the twice-born in this country. The legendary Brahmins burned themselves in the flaming fire through fear of conversion. Some Brahmins killed themselves by taking poison, some by the rope, and some by drowning themselves. The country was contaminated by hatred, and king's favorites could not prevent 1 in 1,000 from committing suicide. A multitude of celebrated Brahmins who prided in their caste fled from the country through by roads as the main roads were closed. Even as men depart from this world, so do the Aryan Sarsat Brahmins, aborigines of Kashmir, flee to foreign countries. These difficult countries through which they passed, the century of food, painful illness, the torments of hell during lifetime removed their minds of Kashmiri Hindus the fears of hell. Oppressed by various calamities such as encounter with the enemy, fear of snakes, fierce heat, scanty of food, many Brahmins perished on the way and thus obtained salvation. I unquote. This was the second miserable mass exodus of the Kashmiri Hindus. John Raja calls it a violent, cruel, brutal, and horrible punishment for the abandoned and vulnerable Sarsat Brahmins of Kashmir. Dr. M. L. Kapoor observes that it took Islam almost 6 centuries to secure a strong foothold in Kashmir. Subsequently, with the jet speed it galloped through the within next 100 years, overshadowed Hinduism and claimed a majority. Quoting Jana Roja, Dr. Kapoor writes, I quote, as the vine destroys the trees and locusts, the paddy crops, so did the Yavanas destroy the usage of Kashmiris, and the kingdom of Kashmir was polluted by evil practice of Marichas. Unquote. Now I come to the third exodus. The third exodus is Qazi Chak, that is Chak, 1506 to 1585. The Chaks belonged to the Shia sect of Muslims. Like all other earlier Muslim rulers, they also adopted their policy of conversion by coercion, loot, plunder, arson, butchering of Kashmiri Hindus. There was no let-up of a religious crusade against them, either to force them to get converted or face liquidation. Paradise Lost, a book written by Professor K. L. Ban, notes, I quote, during the Chak period, the Kashmiri Pandits were persecuted, snubbed, humiliated, held low, and trampled mercilessly. They had to pay tax even for performing their religious rites and obligations, rituals, and customs. To preserve the distinctive traits of their sect and creed, the Kashmiri Pandits were bound to pay 40 precious stones to their ruler. The Chak era goes down black saga in the history of Kashmiri Hindus. The Chak rulers were cruel and heartless and peerless in devising ever new methods of inflicting pain and misery to the heartless and Kashmiri Hindus. Those Kashmiri Hindus who somehow escaped getting converted to Islam fled their native place to seek refuge and sustenance at safer places in the neighborhood of the Kashmir Valley. It was massive exodus in that innumerable Kashmiri Hindus left their homes and hearths and marched out of Kashmir. Thus, the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus was designed, engineered, and pursued to transmute the basic character of the heritage of Kashmir, change its social and religious cultural identity beyond recognition, and reduce this ancient land of Hindu sages and saints to Muslim ghetto, as was conceived by Sayyid theologists. I unquote. Another book by Dr. Satish Ganju in, writes in his book Wailing Kashmir adds, I quote, Kashmiri Pandits suffered furiously under the instruction of Shamsuddin Iraqi and Musa Raina. About 24,000 of them were forcibly converted to Shia sect of Islam. Iraqi had even issued orders. Every day, about 15 to 2,000 Brahmins they brought to his doorstep, removed in their sacred sets, administered kalima to them, and make them eat beef. This even earlier Muslim chroniclers have also said. These decrees were ferociously and brutally carried out. The Hindu religious scriptures from 7th century AD onwards and about 18 magnificent temples were destroyed, property confiscated, and ladies abused. Thousands of Brahmins killed themselves to evade this horrific barbarism, and thousands migrated to other places, resulting in their third tragic mass exodus from the saffron valley of Kashmir. Those who stayed behind were not only forced to pay jizya, but their noses and ears were chopped off. To escape the tremendous pain and agony, they cried, I am not Hindu, I am not Hindu. I unquote. The fourth exodus under the Mughals. In our history books, Mughals are lavishly praised, but I will give the real story of the Mughals. I will not take all the emperors because they ruled for about 200 years. There have been many emperors, but one notable, that is Aurangzeb. I will certainly talk about him. The Mughals ruled for more than 200 years. Earlier Muslim dynasties had very short span of life. The Khilji dynasty ruled for 30 years, Tughlaq dynasty for 94 years, Sayyids for 37 years, and Lodhis for 75 years. The Mughal emperor Aurangzeb wanted to convert India, the land of influence, into Islamic country. He considered conversion to Islam as a part of imperial policy. He demolished temples and humiliated Hindus. He tried to make the Mughal state a Muslim state. In November 1665, Aurangzeb issued orders that Holi not be celebrated, and in the same year, Diwali was also banned. In 1668, Aurangzeb banned the holding of Hindu festival in pilgrimage centers. In 1668, he banned music and disciplined musicians. Taxes were imposed on the Hindus in almost every field. Pilgrim tax was imposed in 1676. Jizya was reimposed in the same year. It was an attempt to humiliate Hindu elite. Aurangzeb, after ascending the throne in Delhi in 1658 to convert whole of India to Islam, he implemented a calculated plan, according to which he started with liquidating Hindu scholars in India in general and Kashmiri Pandits in particular. Since Kashmir has from times immemorial remained a prominent center for learning, according to him, elimination of Hindu scholars was prerequisite for spread of Islam. Iftikhar Khan, 1670-75, the Mughal governor of Kashmir during the reign of Aurangzeb, brutally tyrannized Hindus. He was using force ruthlessly to convert Pandits to Islam. Faced with an ultimatum, many of them began to flee Kashmir. Those who stayed back and refused to accept Islam were put to sword. Now, I will give one more story here. Very important story. This is a fact. It's not a story, but it's a fact. Truth. Some Kashmiri Pandits met under the leadership of Pandit Kriparam of Mutton and decided to go to Swami Amarnath cave temple and invoke the mercy of Lord Shiva. Because by and large, Kashmiri Hindus are Shivites. They believe in Lord Shiva. They have every trust. They know that Lord will help us from that misery. So they decided, because Amarnath, Swami Amarnath is the holiest Shivite shrine. Sometime I will certainly want to explain about two great shrines of Kashmir, Shiva Shrine, Swami Amarnath, and our two Devis, Ragna at Kheer Bhavani and Sharika at Hari Parbat, sometimes next time. At the holy cave temple, one of them saw Lord Shiva in a dream, who told him to go to Tegh Bahadur, the ninth Guru of Sikhs, and ask for help to save the Hindu religion. He spoke to his companions about the revelation and they all decided to appeal the Guru. On May 25, 1675, when 500 Brahmins from the valley, led by Pandit Kriparam, a Sanskrit teacher in Govind Rai, came to Anandpur to narrate their story of repression and woes to Guru Tegh Bahadur. The Guru was moved and told them that their problem could be solved only if some soul of truthfulness and integrity offers himself for sacrifice. His son, Govind Singh, who was at that time just 9 years old, said, I quote, "Who else can be more truthful and sublime than you, sir?" I unquote. Guru Tegh Bahadur was delighted to hear the brave words of his son. He told the Kashmiri Pandits to go and tell the emperor that if he could able to convert the Guru to Islam, they will gladly follow him. Guru Tegh Bahadur went to Delhi and to address the grievances of the Pandits with the Mughal ruler. He was asked to embrace Islam, but when he refused, Aurangzeb executed him. Guru Tegh Bahadur's martyrdom is an event of greatest importance in the evolution of Indian ethos, especially the history of Kashmiri Pandits. In his supreme sacrifice, we can be perceived the trumpet of eternal glory of the Indian spiritual tradition. We have also gone to Anandpur Sahib to pay our respects to Guru there. Despite the supreme sacrifice for the preservation of Hindu religion and Kashmiri ethos, the state terrorism remained unabated. The desecration of temples and the killings of Kashmir continued, and the process of exodus also continued. Thousands who could manage to withstand the tremendous pressure, bade goodbye to their homes and hearths and sought refuge in neighboring regions to keep alive themselves and their faith that was so dear to them. Now I come to the fifth mass exodus, that is Afghan rule, during Afghan rule, 1753 to 1819. Kashmir remained under Afghan rule for 66 years. Like Mughal rulers, Afghan also ruled Kashmir through their governors. In all, 28 Pathan governors and deputy governors ruled Kashmir. Their Afghans in their essential traits were tribal, ferocious, and cruel and inhuman. The Afghan rule in Kashmir 1753 to 1819 was basically a reign of utmost brutality and tyranny. The barbarous Afghans employed every wild, inhuman, primitive, ferocious, and cruel and brutal means to suppress the Kashmiri Hindus. A pitcher filled with filth was placed on the head of a Hindu, and stones were pelt on it till it broke, and the unfortunate Hindu becomes wet with filth. This brutality and atrocity crossed the extreme limits when Hindus were tied up in grass sacks and drowned in Dal Lake. Mr. Bisco records, I quote, it is said that during the Afghan rule in Kashmir 1752 to 1819, the Afghans were in habit of riding into Kashmir houses on their horseback, stabling their horses in the lower portion and occupying the rest for themselves. The Kashmiris were unable to check these outrages by force. No, they devised therefore the plan to having low doors that not only the intruder had to dismount but also to bow his head on entry. As the Afghans were haughty and no one of them was willing to make obeisance to a local person, they were forced to remain outside. I unquote. Hindu parents destroyed the beauty of their daughters by shaving their heads or cutting their noses and ears to save them from degradation. Any Muslim could jump to the back of Hindu for a ride. Mir Hazar, an Afghan governor, used leather bags instead of grass sacks for the drowning of Hindus. Turbans and shoes were forbidden for them. The Hindus were also forced to grow beard, and tilak was forbidden. The Afghan period was the darkest period in the history of Kashmiri Hindus. Afghans are now remembered only for their barbarity, brutality, tyranny, and cruelty. The Afghan behavior was summarized in a Persian couplet which reads as, these stone-hearted people thought no more of cutting of heads than plucking a flower. Walter Lawrence writes, the Pandits who formerly wore mustaches were forced to grow beards, turbans and shoes were forbidden, and the tilak or forehead mark was interdicted. I unquote. He further records the Jaisa or poll tax on Hindus was revived, and many Brahmins fled the country, were killed, or were converted to Islam. Mass migration of Kashmiri Pandits took place in this era. The victimized Hindus were forced to flee the country or were killed or converted to Islam. There was horrible mass exodus of Kashmiri Hindus. The fifth one, a far away place such as Delhi, Allahabad. Many perished covering the long distances on foot. The sixth exodus, 1931 to 1949. In 1819, Maharaja Ranjit Singh annexed Kashmir, which ended the Afghan rule. This was first time in 500 years that a non-Islamic government was ruling Kashmir. Sikhs ruled Kashmir till 1846. Maharaja Ranjit Singh's government was a mixture of Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. Within 4 months of Sikhs rule, census was conducted in Kashmir. The population stood at 6 lakhs, and out of that, 28,000 were Kashmiri Pandits. And the last in last census, the Muslims stood at 95 lakhs, and Kashmiri Pandits barely 3.5 lakhs. See the explosion, population explosion, which is a burning question for India. Population control is a must, otherwise this country cannot survive. According to Ferguson, I quote, the condition of Kashmir under the Sikhs was no doubt an improvement on that under the Afghans. The Hindus, to whom the Sikhs are in many ways very near, benefited most of the disabilities under which they had been unable to practice their rights of their religion were removed. It was now the turn of the Muslim to suffer. Mosques were closed, the call of prayer was forbidden, and capital punishment was awarded for killing a cow. I unquote. After taking over from Sikhs, Sikh period was a small period. After taking over from Sikhs, the Dogras ruled the state from 1846 to 1947, about 100 years. 13th July 1931 will go down as a black day in the history of Kashmiri Hindus in modern times. Paradise Lost by K.L. Ban notes, I quote, the 13th of July 31 will go down as a black day in the history of Kashmiri Pandits in modern times. On the incitement of the directive of the Muslim Reading Room Party, the Muslim handloom hoodlums made the unfortunate Kashmiri Pandits direct target of their wrath, frenzy, and madness. The Gundas and the anti-Kashmiri Muslims had a heyday. They went berserk everywhere, particularly in downtown Srinagar, looting Kashmiri shops and houses and setting them on fire. The booty they laid their hand on in Zanakadal and Maharajganj was distributed. It was, in fact, the looters' day, and the real martyrs were Kashmiri Hindus. Numerous Kashmiri Hindus were killed, many wounded. G.S. Raghavan writes about the loot and plunder of the Hindus on 13th July 1931. I quote, from Borikadal to Kadal, as a long stretch, the Hindu shops were raided. Other localities such as Safakadal and Nawakadal too formed the centers of loot. Bazaar streets were littered with property, books of accounts was burned. The Hindu shopkeepers were molested. The Hindu merchants lost lakhs worth of goods. He further writes, I quote, the most extraordinary portion of the story was that almost simultaneously with the happenings at Srinagar, there was an uprising at a place named Vicharnag, some 5 to 6 miles away. It has been stated that untold atrocities were committed there. Men owning lakhs were reduced to penury, and women were subject to the worst possible cruelties and the most indecent assaults. A military force was dispatched to the place, but the time the havoc had been completed. Some lost their lives and many suffered physical injuries. Stray assaults continued till long after. Tens of thousands of Kashmiri Pandits in the northern, northwest, and northern eastern Kashmir had to flee their homes and hearths and seek refuge in Srinagar. A good number of them left the state for good, thus setting the stage for sixth exodus. Now, finally, I will come to the seventh exodus, which is very important. And seventh exodus, ethnic cleanse of Hindus of Kashmir, 1989 to 1990. On August 15, 1947, India awoke to freedom from yoke of British imperialism. Pakistan army regulars and tribals invaded Kashmir Valley on October 22 in 1947, 2 months after the partition of India. In the territories of the state and which were overrun by the invading hordes were more than 38,000 Hindus and Sikhs were massacred. Thousands of women were abducted. Hundreds of them committed suicide to escape capture. All Hindus and Sikh temples and shrines were burned down or destroyed to erase the last vestige of the Hindu and Sikh culture and religion in the occupied territories. The whole Hindu and Sikh population of the territories occupied by the invading army, which escaped the Holocaust, took refuge in Jammu. The Buddhists in Balistan who escaped the onslaught of the invading army took refuge in Ladakh. The assertion of the Jammu and Kashmir present a heaven of peace and brotherhood, while the rest of India's modern Commonwealth is a myth. People used to say uh, in Kashmir there was everything normal, but nothing like that. The worst possible thing happened in Kashmir, especially uh, Pakistan occupied the territories which were occupied by uh, Pakistan militarily. A survey was conducted, which was published in 2012. The report, widely quoted by research scholars, confirms that there were not able to find a single Hindu or Sikh in the entire region of Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It is estimated around 122,000 Hindus and Sikhs were missing during and after 1947 invasion of Pakistan. None have survived the 47 Pakistan-sponsored Hindu-Sikh genocide, but the worst atrocity was committed in Mirpur, where 25,000 Hindus and Sikhs were rounded up, shot and beheaded, and women raped by Allahu Akbar chanting Pakistani army and religious fanatic members of Lakshar. What was thought to be a march of safety soon turned to the death march as the Pakistan army and members of the Lashkar killed over 10,000 Hindu and Sikhs along the way. They abducted a further 5,000 of our women, most of were sold in bazaars of Rawalpindi, Jhelum, Peshawar. This day, November 25, is observed as Mirpur Massacre Day by the family members of those who were lucky to reach Jammu. This I'm quoting. Mirza is a human rights activist from Mirpur. He currently lives in exile in UK. Another human rights activist, Manu Kharuja, adds, she said, I quote, in 1947, the entire Pakistan acquired Kashmir, Mirpur, Kotli, and Bimar and Muzaffarabad belt was annihilated of its Hindus and Sikhs. Women jumping into Kashmir River after throwing their children first. Thousands were killed, women abducted, raped, and sold by Pakistanis. Although there are detailed accounts by surveyors of carnages in Muzaffarabad, Rajouri, Punch, Birpur, and Kotli in Jammu region, very few written accounts of the Pandits have been published. Dr. Ramesh Tameri has worked on the oral history of tribal invasion and special focus on Hindu minorities in the valley. Accounts of Pandits in Muzaffarabad, Mirpur, Kotli, and Gilgit-Baltistan were collected, giving an insight of the in that era that Jammu and Kashmir saw large-scale organized killings. Family members of those killed or kidnapped have tracked by author. As per his research, 200 villages in north and central Asia where Hindus lived came under Pakistani occupation before the liberation of Indian army. More than 140 people of the Pandits took place in the execution style. There were over 10 massacres, hundreds of houses burned, thousands of houses looted, and hundreds of cases of forced conversion, rape, and migration. This I have quoted from the Tribune, October 27, 2017. This story is long one. I will cut short, sir. The mass of the Hindus and the Sikhs in the territories of state-occupied Kashmir, the uncertainty which followed the exclusion of the state from the Indian constitutional organization, dismissal of the first interim government, the secessionist struggle led by plebiscite front that followed, and induction of thousands of armed infiltrators in Kashmir to lead a Muslim rebellion against India were events which went unheeded. After the truce agreement negotiated by the United Nations and the consequent ceasefire in fighting in the state in January 1949, the Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists continued to fight against the wars of suppression Pakistan waged from the occupied territories, so-called Azad Kashmir, to prevent Muslim distrust in state. In 1953, Kashmiri-speaking Muslims who had supported the accession of the state to India in 47 reiterated their commitment to the unity of India on the ground that India had denied their right to recognize Jammu and Kashmir into another Muslim nation in between India and Pakistan. The Hindus and Sikhs, Buddhists themselves with a force which opposed the Muslimization of the state and fell into the head-on collusion with the new Muslim separatist movement led by all Jammu and Kashmir Plebiscite Front, which was founded in 1955 to ensure the implementation of the United Nations Resolution at Kashmir and waging a plebiscite to determine the future affiliation of the state. The Hindus, Sikhs, and the Buddhists formed the main resistance of the Muslim struggle for self-determination, and the plebiscite front spread till 1975, when the Indira-Abdullah Accord concluded and plebiscite front was dissolved. The Muslimization of the various political and economic processes had begun in the state soon after Sheikh Abdullah came to power, and the minorities in Kashmir were at the receiving end. Under the pretext of economic reform, big landed Estate Abolition Act 1950 was drawn up that year. It placed a ceiling on the land ownership at 186 canals. The rest of the land was redistributed among the landless laborers without any compensation to landlords. Most of the landlords worst affected were Kashmiri Pandits. The state authorities worked very strictly towards the restriction of admission to higher education courses and institutions of Kashmiri Pandits. Simultaneously, their opportunities to enter state government's employment were slashed. Not only that, drastic actions were taken by state government to change the names of 684 names of uh, Hindu names of villages by a government order dated 13 November 1981. Now I will come the basic history. Riots in Kashmir during 1986. Anti-Hindu riots in North Kashmir began in the township of Anantnag in 1986. The riots engulfed the whole of the South Kashmir and spread to the district of Baramulla in the northwest of Kashmir. Mobs to attack the Hindus, burned their homes, and then destroyed their temples and places of worship. The minority community was badly shaken and had no faith in the administration, which had, in many cases, acted in collusion with the fundamentalist and anti-national forces. It is apparent that without the convenience of the like-minded elements in the state administration, these forces could not have brought the destruction they did. The brutalized atmosphere prevailed in Kashmir Valley, speaking a different design was squeezed out this tiny minority. Therefore, large-scale exodus of the second, uh, therefore the large-scale exodus of the scared Pandits appeared to be in the offing. The ethnic cleansing of Hindus of Kashmir in 1990 was one of the few episodes which occurred after the Second World War and in which whole community of people was subjected to genocide and driven out of its natural habitat. Terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir is a process of political violence which has specific political commitments aimed to separate Jammu and Kashmir state. Uh, from India and secured annexation to Pakistan. In fact, it is the low-cost proxy war declared by Pakistan against India to grab Kashmir. The terrorist violence with which the Muslim Jihad in Kashmir commenced in 1989 was aimed to achieve a number of military objectives which the terrorist regimes and the jihadi war groups considered to be essential for the liberation of Jammu and Kashmir from the Indian occupation. The ethnic extermination of the Hindus was one of the primary objectives the jihad aimed to achieve. The Hindus formed the front line of the resistance against the separatist movements in this state, which the Muslim separated forces carried on decades with the support of Pakistan. The Hindus have always supported accession of the state of India. They have undeniably formed the most powerful support base for India in Kashmir. They were always in the forefront of struggle against the secessionism, communalism, and various movements for annexation of the state to Pakistan. A lot of crap has been peddled out about Kashmiri Pandits having dominant position in Kashmir, whereas fact speaks different stories, sir. The basic fact is that the Muslims are ruling elite in Kashmir. They dominate its entire economic organization and enjoy communal precisions in all social forums. Islam is virtually the official religion of the state. Whereas the Muslims constitute a little more than half the population of state, they possess 3/4 of the share of legislative bodies, administrative organization, and all the local government institutions. In the Kashmir province, the Hindus have no elected representatives in the legislative assembly, nor they have any elected representation in the local bodies. They constitute less than 5% of administrative service of the state and have less than 1% share in higher cadres of the state administration. Muslim monopolize 94% of the state services in Kashmir. The Hindus of Kashmir province have absolutely no share in deciding making the clusters of state government, which have always been constituted by the Muslims of Kashmir province. More than 90% of the admissions of the professional, technical, and other education institutes are reserved for Muslims in one form or the other, purely on communal basis. The Hindus, Sikhs, and other minorities bear 8% of the educational facilities that the state provides. There has been continuous disinformation campaign about the terrorist violence in Kashmir that Muslims were subjected to economic deprivations and result in widespread poverty among them. Kashmiri youth felt disgruntled and sick. According to their leadership, this was the basis of their gun culture. If this were the whole truth, why did not the youth other than Muslims in Kashmir and the two divisions, namely Jammu and Gadoo, take to guns like their counterpart in Valley? A close analysis of facts would bear out that the Valley enjoyed a more hectic economic development than did the other two divisions of Jammu and Kashmir. That's why different commissions like Shri Commission in 1979, Gajendra Commission in 1967 had to be appointed to look into lopsided development in Jammu and Ladakh regions. Actually, the Jammu and Kashmir is a prosperous state, which in terms of per capita income is placed third among the Indian states. Again, according to National Sample Survey, Kashmir has the lowest poverty ratio as compared to any state in India. Only 3.5% of Kashmiri population was below poverty line in 1999-2000. The national average was the high at 20.1%. Maharashtra is the second richest state in India, but the poverty ratio is 25%, whereas Orissa has the highest poverty ratio of 47.2%. On the average, central per capita assistance to the Kashmiri is 8 times more than other fellow citizens in the country. The terrorist violence raging in Jammu and Kashmir is another direct action that Pakistan and Muslim secessionists inside the state have launched to force a second partition. The campaign of terror spread in Jammu and Kashmir follows the same pattern which the direct action followed in 46. Genocides of Hindu, their ethnic cleansing were forced exodus from the Muslim majority provinces of India and destruction of their religious identity. The jihad which Pakistan launched in 1990 to liberate Jammu and Kashmir from the Indian hold mounted its first attack on the Hindus of Kashmir. The terrorist assault on Hindus in Kashmir commenced in the fall of 1989, and by summer 1990, more than 700 of them have been assassinated in cold blood. Among those killed were people from all sections of the Hindu society: teachers, lawyers, political activists, media men, intellectuals, and men of small means. The massacre of Hindus was accompanied by widespread campaign of intimidation and threat to drive out the Hindus from the Kashmir province, burn their temples and religious shrines and homes, and loot their property. Sri Jagmohan, in his book Shaping India's New Destiny, states, I quote, on July 13, 89, Pandit Tikalal Teplu, an advocate and vice president of BJP, was shot dead near his house. Judge Pandit Nilakant Ganju, who had sentenced Makbul Bhatt, was killed on November 4, 1989, in broad daylight at the busy Hari Singh Street. Pandit Premnath Bhatt, a noted journalist, was done to death on December 29, 1989. The murder of these three prominent leaders of Kashmiri Pandit community was in line with the terrorist policy of killing one and frightening 1,000. The objective was to secure exodus of Pandits from the valley. No one was arrested and tried for this crime. Not even today, sir. On January 4, 1990, local newspapers had published a press release issued by Hizbul Mujahideen. The group had urged young people to wage jihad for secession from India and annexation to Pakistan. The release had also ordered Hindus to leave the valley. A campaign uh, by the Muslim population was carried out. Inflammatory speeches were made from loudspeakers of mosques. Posters were stuck on the houses of shops of Kashmiri Pandits, ordering them to either embrace Islam or leave the Kashmir. They were threatened with their lives. Reports of Kashmiri Pandits being killed had started to come. Posters were also pasted outside the mosques and at selected busy places, labeling Kashmiri Pandits as agents of India and branding them as traitors. The Al Safa, one of the newspapers, was in the vanguard of publishing these threats. This paper virtually became the mouthpiece of the terrorists, played the capital role of fanning the flames and carrying them remote corners of valley. Kashmiri Muslims were clear in this slogan. We want Pakistan, including our Kashmiri women, and exclusive of Kashmiri Pandits. कश्मीर में रहना है तो अल्लाह अकबर कहना है.
I
कश्मीर
think
बनेगा पाकिस्तान. All newspapers published from Srinagar carried no news.
Chamanlal ji, I think I think we will have to continue on another session. We've already crossed 30 minutes more.
I will conclude with that because I have come to a very.
No, we can give you another slot.
Pardon?
Okay. We can continue in another slot if you want.
Because this is very important, sir. Now I'm concluding it with a very positive note, sir.
Yes.
All newspapers published from Srinagar carried on no news worth the name, other than declaration by National Conference Congress Muslim Workers leaders, I'm not a spy. There was a mushroom growth of militant and terrorist officers. J.K. Love had been there in the vanguard of the establishment of Nizam Mustafa. Other groups were Al Jihad, Doktrani Millat, Muslim Janbaz Force, Ikhwani Musliman, Allied Traga, Hizbul Bizawi, and more. They forced displacement of Kashmir Badr and their targeted killings were organized with a clear objective of ensuring Kashmir Valley is cleansed of its minorities. As such, 85,000 Kashmiri Pandit families were uh, forced out from their ancient indigenous habitat in Indian administered Kashmir by terrorists and religious extremists. According to late Ghulam Ahmad Sofi, a former editor of Delhi, Daily Srinagar Times, I quote, nearly 32,000 Kashmiri Pandit houses have been burned since 1991. The rumblings of the storm which engulfed Kashmiri Pandits were heard long before it swept the valley. The ultimate and devastating blow came on January 1999 90, late in the night when the hell was let loose. The total breakdown of the law and order machinery spread the deep dens of insecurity, which was so severe that the most of the Pandits, Hindus, fled the valley and migrated to Jammu and Delhi in the dark hours of night with their shirts on. In Jammu, where the refugees poured in thousands, the state government failed to rise to the occasion and provide temporary shelter and relief to the hundreds of thousands of Hindus falling in the streets in this temple state of Jammu. Were it not the human service of voluntary Hindu organizations immediately swung into action to organize relief for the refugees, hunger and disease would have taken heavy toll of unfortunate people who had suddenly been thrown out into wilderness. No help came from any quarter. Silence of the death fell on liberals, the propagandists of secularism, the radicals, and the rest. Gita Bhavan, a temple complex situated in the heart of Jammu state, adjacent to Shiva temple, was converted to the reception come, register come, where the Hindu refugees arriving from Kashmir disembarked. The various Hindu organizations of Jammu, which had organized relief and Hindu refugees arriving in thousands of Kashmir Valley, established a broad-based relief committee constituted of several prominent leaders of Jammu and Kashmir. The organization was named as Sahayata Samiti. Pandit Amarnath Vaishnavi, a prominent Hindu leader and a social activist, was appointed the vice president of the Samiti. Pandit Vaishnavi was actually put the control of the function of the Samiti. In Delhi, the other main place where the refugees arrived in large numbers, the work and relief relations were taken up by the Kashmiri Samiti Delhi, headed by Chaman Gadoo, a social worker. In Delhi, the main place of refuge, the Kashmiri Samiti took up the work of relief and reparation. A transit company set up Kashmir Bhavan itself for the displaced person who were later shifted to 14 other camps in Delhi. In Jammu, 32 refugee camps were established to accommodate refugees. Refugees camps were established at Nagrota, Riyasi, Udhampur, and Kathua. As a major assault on Hindus was delivered in January 19, the Hindu temples and shrines, religious places, and Hindu religious institutions came under heavy attack of the militants. Almost all over the Kashmir province, temples were desecrated, subject to bomb attacks, and at many places set on fire. In suburban villages and remote regions of the province, Hindus have fled away. There was no one left to report the damage done to temples or complained about it. The state government exerted no interest in protection of the safety of the Hindu temples. At many places in Srinagar as well as the other townships of the Kashmiri, Hindus who went to the lodge complained about the discretion of the demolition of temples, disoperation of their land, arson uh, on their homes, were turned back from the police station, district, and tahsil offices without being able to get complaints registered. The issue of the demolition of the damage of the Hindu temples was raised in the Indian Parliament on March 12, 1993. The Minister of State of Home in the Government of India stated in the Parliament that 38 Hindu temples had been demolished and damaged in the Kashmir. During the period of 1981 to 1989 to 1991, he stated that during the year 1389, 13 temples were demolished. During year 1999, temples demolished and damaged and in 91, 16 temples were demolished and damaged. In the aftermath of demolition of Babri structure, erupted into widespread attack on the Hindu temples and places of worship. As many as 97 temples were burned or damaged in the incidents of terrorist violence in Jammu and Kashmir from 92 till July 1995. 1,747 civilians lost their lives in the last 19 months. The Lok Sabha was informed that on August 9, 95, on the same day, Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Bhupesh Chaturvedi, said in a written reply, 31 temples were damaged only in the year 1995, and added the security arrangements have been made to vulnerable areas, including regular patrolling of security forces and protection against attacks by militants. Ethnic cleansing and genocide of Kashmiri Hindus is violation not only human rights but also constitutional rights. In report by Kashmir by Amnesty released in December 93, it said armed opposition groups in Jammu and Kashmir have been responsible for numerous and grave human rights abuses, including hostages taking, assassination, and politicians and their families, deliberate killings of civilians, including journalists, torture, and rape. It urged all such groups to release all hostages and respect human rights and humanitarian status. I unquote. The the National Human Rights Commission, in a ruling on June 11, 1999, stated the Commission is constrained to observe that acts akin to genocide have occurred with the respect of Kashmir. I don't know what is akin. UN, UN Secretary General at the 60th session of Human Rights in Geneva on 7th April 2004 observed when civilians were deliberately targeted because they belong to a particular community, we are in the presence of potential, if not actual, genocide. No inquiry commission has been constituted by state or central government so far by bringing the culprits to book who are responsible for genocide and ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Hindus, nor the Honorable Supreme Court of India has acted so far, even after the obligation of Article 370. Now, finally, I want to say the Hindus have loved their land with greater spiritual and social commitment than the Muslims because they are not impostors and they have been living in the valley generation after generation over thousands of years. They possess a greater sense of belonging, being the original inhabitants and owners the rich ancestral heritage and have their roots in the geography of the land. They are not conquerors, they have risen from their soil. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Your first 20 minutes was like a recap, and followed by what you mentioned is so horrific. What you made a greatest representation so far with full of statistics. And I'm sorry we have to cut you short now. And I just wanted to read only one message here by Sharala Jagannathan. I don't know whether you can read the message. Mahaperiva Saranam. The truth of the genocide need to be told. Please let us have another session. So you are like in public demand, people are asking you to come again. It's a very painful truth, but it will unite the Hindus across India and help the Pandits get justice. Justice has been delayed. Let it not be denied, at least now. I can only feel his deep pain as he encounters the horrors they faced.
Thank
So
you.
that sums up everything. Your presentation was full of statistics, so much information you gathered. I just want to ask only one question. You had a meeting in the U.S., in Washington and other places. Did you did you brief Stephen Solars and others the same information that you
Yes,
mentioned now?
I have explained him the whole, and he was so moved. On my visit to Washington, my people took me at a place just as we in Delhi we have uh, uh, in Connaught Place, a place selected for where we can just demonstrate. Similarly, uh, in White House, they have selected a place where uh, you can demonstrate. I was I was told and taken to that place where Mr. Solar had spoken to the people, and they told me that Solaris has said that since the Christian doesn't believe in Punarjanma, but he was of this view that Mr. Solar was a Hindu in previous Janma, and then they wanted to know what exactly I had told him that made him so emotional, and he did lot uh, for us uh, in propagating our miseries, our problems there. That is a great thing. Instantly, I can tell you one thing more. I have met lot many lawmakers there, and we had many sessions. And I can tell you, those people know much better than our people here about uh, the reality about Kashmir. Here we have only lip sympathy, but they know where the shoe pinches.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation today. We will plan another one sometime in we have booked till June. So I'll reschedule where we can talk about the next steps now, based on what you mentioned. And
That will
now
be
we are all talking about coexistence, and we talked about it earlier, inclusion. So I think people who listen to the presentation today will be thinking about it. Maybe we should talk about this in the forthcoming
sure,
session
sir.
with you. I will reschedule one for you. Thank you very much again for the
Namaskar.
efforts and the time you took for making this presentation. Thank you, sir. We want to conclude today's session slightly. It took more than 30 minutes or so. We want to thank all our viewers, and this is full of statistics and information. We will reschedule another slot for Shri Gadoo. We want to again thank Kamakoti.tv and Kanjimat channels, VDSP for streaming, and not to forget our leading Tamil newspaper, Dinamalar, for giving maximum information about our Saturday sessions. Please stay tuned and join us again next Saturday. Next Saturday, we have Sri Rakesh Kaul joining from New Jersey. And it's going to be a very interesting topic. Don't miss. And we'll see you again next Saturday. Haragara Shankara, Jai Jai Shankara.